This episode is brought to you by Iams Pet Food. When you choose Iams dry dog or cat food, you can see a difference in your pet with your own eyes. Healthy energy in 5 days, healthy digestion in 10 days, and healthy skin and coat in just 25 days. Satisfaction for you and them. Guaranteed or your money back. Feed Iams dry dog or cat food and see a visible difference. Visit iams.com/difference to learn more.
This is the sound of your ride home with Dad after he caught you vaping. Awkward, isn't it? Most vapes contain seriously addictive levels of nicotine and disappointment. Know the real cost of vapes. Brought to you by the FDA.
Come to me.
Focus Features invites you to succumb to the darkness.
Nosferatu.
From director Robert Eggers comes a masterpiece of horror.
He is coming. This creature is a force more powerful than evil. It is death itself.
Nosferatu. Rated R. Under 17, not admitted without parent. Only in theaters Christmas Day. Special engagements in Dolby and IMAX.
We're gonna carry on and plan the sequel, because let's face it, baby, these days, you gotta have a sequel.
And welcome back to Micro Queers. It's our sporadic queer horror movie review roundup thing. Lots of ours. I'm Joe.
And I'm Trace, and we are discussing Alice Maio Mackay's Carnage for Christmas, or, as it is stylized in the actual title card, Carnage for Christmas, a transgender holiday film from Alice Maio Mackay.
You know what? I love that because this movie does have something of a jaunty vibe to it, doesn't it?
It does. Honestly, I'm not quite sure if this is an intentional homage, but it reminded me of Greg Araki's The Doom Generation, which opens with like a very heterosexual film.
Yes, just for all the haters out there, we're making sure you understand exactly what you're getting into.
Yes, exactly. And that is what this is, isn't it, Joe?
Truly, yeah. So, folks, this is directed by Mackay as well as written by her. And then we have a co-writer, Benjamin Paul Robinson. And Trace, we've talked about one of Alice's previous films. I think it was Bad Girl Boogie.
Yes. It's interesting because I haven't seen a ton of Mackay's films, but I know, right. I mean, she's been churning these things out at least like 1 or 2 a year for the past couple of years. And
yeah,
from what I gather from reading other people's thoughts on her films, that it feels like we're watching a filmmaker grow from film to film to film.
Yeah, and we had the opportunity to see this one at Salem earlier this year, and we ended up I think we went to have drinks because we knew that it was going to be readily available, and it was a holiday film. So we were like, we will circle back come Christmas time. So here we are delivering on that promise. But yeah, compared to the film that we had previously reviewed to now, I think there's been at least 2 other movies in between. But one of the things that I remember we had a few issues with that other film was the fact that the narrative just felt a little underbaked, right? Like we wanted something a little bit more streamlined that would allow Alice to really like work on her vision, because the visuals were never her problem.
No. And I would argue that they're not a problem here either.
No. I think there's some really interesting visuals going on, but by virtue of just having a bit more of a straightforward, I'm not going to say conventional, like it's a bad thing, but like this film very clearly has discernible acts, like a bit of a character arc and that kind of stuff. Like it just feels like we said, okay, people want a bit more plot. Here, we're going to give it to them. Still the great visuals. And I think that this does make for that much more of a stronger film.
Yeah, I would agree. I think there are maybe a couple issues still with the screenwriting, because one thing that irked me about this film that I do think I had an issue with in Bad Girl Boogie 2 was that there's a lot of talking about people that we haven't met yet. And
yeah,
like it seems like there's a lot of characters in this movie, and there are quite a bit, but we keep talking about characters. And maybe that's just me not having a good attention span. But I kept kind of being like, wait, who are we talking about here? Because we've got like this whole town to go through.
It is that, and folks, we're still dealing with a pretty short runtime. So this is clocking in at what, like 70 minutes, maybe 74 with credits. So it is a lot of, hey, you need to know who all of these people are, but not everyone really comes either into the foreground or into the narrative in a super meaningful way. Like, this is a movie with a vast conspiracy, but we don't meet most of the people behind the conspiracy. We really only meet one villain, and then there's the Santa slasher who is doing all of the killings, and of course we had to get to the reveal of who that person is. And I think that works, but by virtue of having this bigger overarching gentrification conspiracy thing, I was like, oh, but that doesn't land as well because none of those people feel real, because it's just things that characters are talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think I agree. The gentrification stuff is a little bit more half-baked or less fully baked. Yeah, right. Sure. One of those things.
We'll go with a cookie metaphor because it's the holidays.
But on the flip side, though, the stuff with the trans tracers I thought was a really interesting idea, and it works for the most part in the killer reveal. But again, I was kind of like, oh, like, I wish maybe that was more of a through line throughout the film. It feels like this film's trying to do a lot in that short runtime.
Yeah. There's just a lot going on, which sometimes can be like, oh, wow, there's just so much going on in this world. And some of these are red herrings meant to distract us from who the killer actually is. And I think if you look at it from that perspective, it kind of works. But I agree with you that there are certain things that it just feels like, oh, we could also put in a bit of that. So it feels like there's a bunch of really interesting ideas, but they don't all get enough airtime.
Yeah, agreed. But I will say, though, I mean, for what works for me is the character of Lola, played by Jeremy Moynihan. And this is how Jeremy is credited on both IMDb and Wikipedia. So I'm assuming that is their actual name.
Okay.
But nevertheless, I think Moynihan does a really, really good job as Lola. I mean, she has to carry the film.
Yeah, no. And this is a fun character in the vein of like The Fog or what's some other things with like podcasters.
Oh, you think like radio hosts, but podcasters?
Yeah, like introduced with a great voice, lots of personality. You can understand like part of the killer reveal. Folks, we're going to spoil the movie like we always do.
It's a micro-queers.
So we learned that the killer Dave, who is working for the Historical Society in the small town that Lola comes from, he's very clearly partially in love with her, but also he treats her like a celebrity because she's one of the few people who has left the town, gone on to do something big. But I do like this idea that there's a mixture of admiration, sex appeal, and so on. But it's like, oh, she's the queer person who got big, got out, and then has turned these kinds of stories, like these urban legends, these folk tales, and so on, like she's introduced telling the story that will come to define the town she's from, right? Like there was the toy maker. She found the sole person from his family who was never discovered. And as a result, you're like, ooh, that's spicy. She's cool. But also it has that element of an urban legend to it, right? So I love that we're playing with podcast tropes and all that kind of fun stuff.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're going into true crime, right? Which should really hit home for you.
Yeah. Like everything that she was doing, I was just like, oh, and then the tease to come back and listen to the next part of the episode, like that's just case file.
Exactly. But I like the subversion though, right? Because you think, okay, this is going to be like an anti-trans, like a trans hater person. And it's not. It's someone who is seemingly like very accepting of trans people and just feels burned because they were rejected. So it's that was a different avenue to take this that I was quite surprised by. Even if I don't know, I was a little let down kind of with the whole climactic reveal because it felt like, again, like we weren't focusing on that as the theme of the film. And so it felt like it came out of nowhere.
Yeah. Like we get this dangling piece where, okay, so there have been some other murders in town. And because Lola is into true crime, she can actually list them all for the other villain, which is Sergeant Kelly. So she says, actually, this town has had way more murders than the murders that you're acknowledging. So she's talking about, indigenous people, black people, other queer people who have been killed. So again, it's that follow through with the marginalized people not being important enough to be considered in the crime stats. But I love that Lola knows all of them because she knows her history. She's on top of, social justice movements and that kind of stuff. But yeah, so it's like we get this tease that, okay, so there have been things going on in this town. And one of them is a trans backpacker who came through town and was killed. And of course, we learn at the end that Dave had a connection with this woman and he was rejected. So I feel like those bits do follow through. And you're right, you know, there's the chasers, the trans chasers, which is something that I knew, but mostly from like porn categories, if we're being honest.
Well, I guess I was going to say that, or like, I mean, I guess here in the States, it's like, oh, any conservative senator or politician who is like has their kink is like transness.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot to unpack in that one.
well, no, but that's what I'm saying, though. I think there is a lot to unpack about that, and I don't think we unpack it enough in this movie.
Yeah, it feels like something where if you were within the trans community, you would probably be much more familiar with it because you might have encountered it yourself or had friends talk to you about it and so on. Like, I imagine it can be difficult to make a genuine connection because you don't know if people are interested in you or if they're interested in your status as a trans person. That would be really fucking aggravating.
Right. You're being fetishized. Like, this is a person that's actually making a human connection with you. It's your identity.
Yeah. And I agree. I think it's partially that we're looking at this as gay men and saying, that's a really interesting idea. I would love to know more about it. But the movie is only kind of tangentially interested in doing that, in part because it's Dave's backstory and we need it for the reveal.
Well, and I guess Dave just doesn't feel like much of a character before, because he has maybe 2 scenes before his reveal at the end.
Yeah, but I would argue that nearly everybody, like, it's the reason that Lola ends up shining so brightly is because she's in a lot of this movie. But like, she also has a boyfriend named Charlie who is played by Zarif, and you know, they're an interesting character. Like, the way it was introduced, I couldn't figure out if Lola was dating the girl in their friend group, who I think is Farah. She's the person who ends up writing the story that we see at the end. Like, they publish a book on the story and so on. But I was like, oh, okay, I'm interested in, I guess, the politics or the dynamics of this friendship group. And then it's just revealed, no, Lola's actually with Charlie. And he's in it for like maybe 2 scenes as well. And I feel like that's kind of a persistent problem throughout the film is there's a bunch of interesting characters, but most of them only get a couple of scenes. And as a result, you're like, so are they important? Are they introduced so that they're going to be killed? Or is there something else going on? And it ends up being a bit of a mix. But as a result, I want to say there's got to be, what, a dozen characters in this movie?
It's hard to latch onto someone that's not Lola, which maybe that is the intent. So where I do think Mackay can kind of like flesh out, I guess it's not just her, right? Because we are talking about a co-writer with Robinson here, but like they can kind of maybe fine-tune some of their character work and screenwriting work. But on a technical level, I mean, I feel like Mackay is establishing herself as some kind of auteur, because I feel like I can look at any of her films and be like, oh, that looks like an Alice Maio Mackay film. You know, these like neon colorful lights. There's an animated sequence in this movie.
I love the animation stuff.
Yes, and this rapid fire editing too, which I think works in some scenes, but in scenes where you're really trying to connect with a character, that rapid editing doesn't always work. It works against the film.
Yeah, I would agree. I think visually there's a lot of energy here, and the editing definitely contributes to that. But there was also a point where, from the way it integrates into the story, I was trying to figure out if Lola was actually getting glimpses of the future, or like what was flashback, what was maybe anticipating, and so on. Because like we get repeated scenes of Lola seeing 2 guys who like punch out Dave at a party. And I was like, I know that these are flashbacks, but then we also see almost like staccato style editing of some of the murders. And I was like, this is edited in a similar kind of way. And I just got a little bit confused as to like, what is the purpose of this editing choice?
Yeah, I mean, like we know that these films are like, I mean, I'm going to say micro budget because I do think that's what they are.
Well, I think it's also the way that she can continue to make so many of them so quickly is because she's like shooting very quickly with minimal budgets, and it's like, cool, I just need actors, I need them to learn their lines, and let's come in and do this.
Yeah, and this is a girl who's like in her early 20s at the oldest. So like it's impressive, but I do think there's kind of that caveat there where it's like, oh, okay, like even though this is like, you know, her like 5th or 6th film, you're watching a filmmaker, as I said, grow from the beginning of the episode. But Some of the kill scenes are good. It's very clear in this movie that we are saving the gore budget for the climax.
Yeah, so there are some pretty good practical effects, like gore stuff in the back half of the film, including what is referred to as a blood eagle. And Trace, we're covering Hannibal on the Patreon. So I was just like, oh, wow, this is like either a great homage or just a fantastic visual image that we can pull from. Mm-hmm. But it looks great. Like we see a bunch of body parts basically in the back half, but you also have to get to those because the first couple of kills were either like cutting away from them, the way that they're shot, it isn't quite landing, and then we are getting some CGI blood, which made me worried initially.
Yeah, I think specifically it's Julie's death, the roommate, so she's like, kind of macking with her girlfriend in the car, girlfriend gets killed, and then she gets chased down the road. And I actually thought this was shot pretty cool. We're getting this really nice shot of this killer chasing her just down an abandoned street. But yeah, then the killer hits her, CGI blood spray, cut to the next scene. And I was like, oh, that screams budgetary restriction.
Yeah. So when you're saying it feels like we're kind of holding back so that we can get to some of that good gore later on, I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
I think part of the problem is that if you're just watching this and you're going and saying like, oh, is this what the rest of the deaths are going to be like? We can now reassure you folks, it's not that case. It's just like the first couple of kills make it seem like it might be. So you just have to stay with the film.
Yep, just stay with it, like we did.
Yeah.
But no, overall, I quite enjoyed this, though. I mean, I did prefer this to Bad Girl Boogie, and I do think that it feels like a more confident film from Mackay.
I absolutely agree. Yeah, like if nothing else, we are seeing growth. Like, yeah, we raised a lot of the same concerns that we had last time, but I do think that they're being addressed. And like if a critique is, oh, there's a few too many characters, a few too many plot lines, it's also because I'm interested in a lot of that, and I just want to have a bit more time with these characters and get to know them even better. So it's like it's a complaint, but it's also hopefully a bit of a compliment. And Trace, just before we close out, I do want to do one final thing to praise about this film, which is the mask of this killer.
Oh, yes, right? Like, how do you make a Santa mask different? You like mirror tile it?
Yeah, it's a little bit rhinestone. Like it kind of reminded me or felt of a kin of the devil from Apartment 7A, where it was like bedazzled in the dance sequences.
Yes, absolutely.
So you know what? I am here for villains like leveling up their jewelry game. That sounds pretty cool to me.
I just want a killer in a disco ball costume. Just give me that.
Actually, you know what? I think there's a queer horror film that's been crowdfunding forever, but it's kind of like Mirrorball meets Pinhead.
Oh my God, yeah, I love
it. Looks pretty cool.
Okay, yeah, into it. But nevertheless, everyone, let us know what you thought about Carnage for Christmas. And if you've actually seen more of Mackay's filmography than I have, specifically, let us know, where does this stack in her oeuvre?
Yeah.
But until next time, we can cross out Carnage for Christmas.
Indeed, and cross out microqueers.